In this episode, I speak to the author, the narcissist expert, the host of the Trauma and Narcissism Redefined podcast, the remarkable Caroline Strawson. Do you like that? Remarkable? Did that make you blush?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I need to look behind me now and go, who?
No, I'm definitely talking about you. You are fabulous. Your content is incredible. And one of the reasons why I reached out to you, narcissism is one of those words, I think, that has become somewhat of a buzzword. And when that happens, it kind of loses its meaning a little bit. You're talking about it from a realistic perspective. You're offering value. And I really admire that.
Thank you. I think I kind of look at it through a bit of a different lens to maybe clinical psychologists or psychiatrists as well. Maybe that's because I've experienced it myself. Maybe it's because, I tried lots of things to move forward after I'd been in that relationship and nothing really seemed to work and I didn't really understand why. And I think when we use the word narcissist, you're right, it's overused in our society now. And that doesn't mean there aren't lots of narcissists out there, but what it means is it's become almost like a parody in some respects. Anyone who isn't very nice is a narcissist. And the problem with doing that is, narcissistic abuse is a form of domestic abuse. In fact, my belief is all domestic abusers are narcissists. So when we are rolling our eyes at the word, what we do to those genuinely experiencing narcissistic domestic abuse, we're basically shaming them and minimizing their experiences. And that's where the problem lies. So it's a word really for survivors to use and for us to have an understanding. And it's a great descriptive term for certain traits that an individual will have. Just like we call a car, we don't call it a chassis or an engine or a tire or a steering wheel. We call it a car. But sometimes we get demonized for using the word narcissist, which is a collective term for lots of different behavioral traits of somebody.
And already you're offering value. That's exactly right, I think. Because I heard somebody talking about labeling and they used a cake as an example. And they said, if we listed all the ingredients of a cake, it would take a really, really long time. So we have to find words that help people understand what we're talking about. Otherwise, I'd be standing there going eggs, butter, flour.
And it just allows us then to know, that if we can use that word and people have a sense of understanding, it allows us to step into our healing, because there is no research out there, whatever anybody says, you show me the scientific evidence of this, because there is none. But narcissists will not change. So once we know a narcissist doesn't change and we can use that word, then we can focus on ourselves. Us trying to change the narcissist is like us drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die. It's not going to happen. However much we believe in humanness and compassion and kindness, and boy, did I try, it just doesn't happen. And that's not because I'm being cruel. It's not because I'm, saying, castigating people and not wanting to help them. If I could, I would, absolutely. But a narcissist doesn't take any ownership or responsibility. So we can't help somebody who doesn't recognize that they've done anything wrong in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I check on when I do my consultations is, are they ready to change? Do they really want to change? Or are they looking for extra ways, more creative ways to avoid something?
Really great point that, Johnny, because, people might say they want to, and this is a lot of the work that I do around the sort of nervous system, the trauma-informed piece. A lot of us want to change, I know I'm good enough. I know I'm worthy. I know all of that. The problem being is the body doesn't know that. And as human beings, we're driven by survival. So, however we're showing up in our lives, and often sometimes with destructive parts of us, that's always our nervous system still working for us. So we might know we want to heal, we want to change. But if the body isn't on board with that, and the nervous system is like actually healing and being successful or visible or whatever it is that you want to do feels dangerous, it won't happen, however much thought we put into it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be fun in a weird kind of way. I was telling my wife this morning, which is interesting because my wife's name's Caroline, and this is it. Yeah, so this feels like we don't meet many Carolines. My wife always laughs. This is I never meet a Caroline that's under 60 years old.
I was called Caroline because when I was born, it was like Sweet Caroline.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. When that song comes on, it's the best.
Yeah, there's a few Carries around. My family call me Carrie. And actually, 3 months, in fact, it was probably a bit less than 3 months into my relationship with my ex-husband, he got a tattoo with the name Carrie on his arm. And at the time when he got that tattoo, I was like, oh my God, he must really love me and everything else. Not great big waving red flags or anything. I thought, oh, he's filling my soul now. I must be good enough because he's getting a tattoo with my name on. And of course, now I think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking, Caroline? But at the time, because of my core wounds, I was a magnet to a narcissist because I was just this innate people pleaser all of the time.
That's really important, I think, the attraction part of it all. But I think what we'll do first is, for those that might not be familiar with you and your work, can you just tell people a bit about yourself, and then we can go on to some of the more juicy things as well.
Sure. So I didn't start out to do the work that I do now as a sort of therapist and coach specializing in trauma, nervous system, narcissism. I was actually a podiatrist. That's actually where I started out, would you believe? So I was a podiatrist. I worked for the NHS. Then I worked for Virgin Atlantic for a period of time. I love traveling and met Richard Branson on many, many occasions. A great man, actually. Then I worked for British Airways for a while. And then I gave up work. I was married and then I had children. And so I gave up work. And actually that meant I became financially reliant on my husband at the time. And I didn't realize that actually the dynamics of that, because I was actually earning more than him at the time, there was definitely elements of financial abuse. So as I was going through my marriage, we had our son, then we had our daughter. I had like 4 miscarriages between my son and my daughter. And then when I was 6 months pregnant, my husband at the time sadly cheated on me. So I always thought I'm just married to a cheater. I didn't realize the subtleties actually of the abuse that I was enduring within the marriage, because it's not like a light switch that happens in an abusive marriage. It doesn't just happen. It's over. It's a chip away. And then when I was 6 months pregnant, I knew things weren't right, but I was brought up on fairy tales, happily ever afters. You keep your family together. So that's what I did. I just focused purely on being a mum. You know, my sense of worth was being a mother. And then very sadly in 2009, my mum passed away very, very suddenly. And she was kind of like my rock, really. My dad is also very narcissistic. So I was there with no mum. I was, desperately trying to grieve, but I'd got these 2 children. And then a year later, my husband walked out on us too. So I was there as this single mother in a broken home. And I found out we were in over £70,000 worth of debt. I was struggling myself with PTSD, depression, anxiety, self-harm, panic attacks. And I was so ashamed because I felt like I'm getting older. I have nothing now. And I thought, I'm going to end up on the Jeremy Kyle show at this rate. Like literally, I thought, my God, that's going to be me, because I just felt so much shame. So when I found out my house was repossessed, I just, again, dipped into a further depression. And again, I've always said if I didn't have my children, I would not be here today. I was in a really, really dark place. And then in April 2013, I had my house repossessed. So we were made homeless, didn't have anywhere to go, managed to find some rented accommodation then in a much, much smaller house. And I hit 40 that year. And I kind of was at this crossroads of, what do I do? There was an element of, that's it now. My life is over. I'm downhill from now. And I was at 40, and I genuinely had the best years of my life. I was really feeling like this. And, but there was still this little light inside of me where I thought, no, didn't know how. And as I started then to try counselling and therapy, they helped in the moment because I felt validated, but I was still hugely triggered and, living a life in functional freeze with explosive moments of anger, crying the next, not wanting to see anybody the next. And it was just this like emotional roller coaster. And then I actually just started a little home-based business that really exploded, actually. It did really well. And what I found with that is what I loved, helping people. Lots of people were coming to me, probably who'd experienced similar things to me. And I thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. So I completely retrained in lots of nervous system stuff, body work, because I realized a missing piece in a lot of therapy and counseling and talk stuff was this nervous system piece, the feeling side of it, to feel, to heal. So I retrained in things like internal family systems, brain spotting, EMDR, breath work. I'm a real advocate of positive psychology, which is a science of happiness too. And I kind of integrate all of these things together with like somatic experiencing too. And I started doing one-to-ones, became very, very busy. And I thought, okay, I need to now do group programs on this. So I started to do group programs, became really busy. And as other people were healing, they wanted to go out and help others. So I created this coaching certification, which is now the world's only somatic trauma-informed coaching qualification. It's a level 7 qualification. It's the only one in the world. Most are accredited with things like ICF and CPD. This is a qualification. It's the only one. And you can also specialize in narcissism if you want to do that too. And then as they were starting to heal and work with others, we realized we want this work in schools and workplaces and public sector. So I recently in April started another business called the Mental Wellbeing Company, which is a franchise and licensing business where you get access to workshops. And so you go through the training and you get access to workshops to take into schools, workplaces and organizations. So if you'd have said this to me years ago, that I would now be running a multi-7-figure business, owning my own home and having 12 full-time members of team and communities totaling over 400,000 across the board, I'd have thought you were crazy. But it just epitomizes, I think, when you lean into maybe a passion and a purpose. And, you know, whilst financial security is really important to me because I have 2 children, they're 19 and 16 now, and it is important. Actually, I couldn't do this if I didn't have this drive. And the drive is to not let people suffer as long as I did, to know that there's hope, to know that there's reasons why you feel the way that you do. You're not lazy, you're not a failure, you're not bad. There are just parts of you that are protecting you in the moment, and we want to get curious as to why they are there. So I feel so blessed actually that I went through the trauma that I did. This is what we call post-traumatic growth, because I wouldn't be doing this and leading the life and the connections and the joy and meeting people like yourself, Johnny, had I not experienced that. Because I'd have probably gone back to a mediocre life, but I really am living, well, a thriving and flourishing life, and I feel super grateful for that.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to post-traumatic growth. That is something I am in full understanding of. But I just wanted to take a moment. I'm sure you have many, many times, but how remarkable is that story? I'm just going to summarize. You were subjected to adultery. You lost your mother. Your marriage ended. You lost your home, and you had debt of £70,000. I think that's what you said. And what I heard amongst all of that early on as you were talking was how much responsibility it felt that you took for that.
Yeah, it felt heavy. It felt really, really heavy. And it felt like it was my fault, which of course came from my childhood and those core emotional wounds of not feeling good enough from my father. You know, I was never praised. Nothing felt good enough to me. And I saw that and interpreted that there was something wrong with me. I needed to do more, be more, which is why I became this high-achieving, people-pleasing perfectionist as a child. But even that wasn't good enough to my father. So his lack of praise was, for me, a reflection of me. I didn't know as a kid that actually he was incapable. You know, he's 83 now, and I'm 51 in a week or so. And he still has never praised me, ever. But I don't expect it now, because I know it's not that he's not giving it because I'm not doing enough. It's because he's just incapable of that. But as kids, we don't know that. Everything becomes about us, and it creates that core emotional wound that then becomes like everything in our system doesn't want to feel like that. And that's when we get these kind of like protector responses coming up, like procrastination or people pleasing or even things like as adults, addiction, self-harm, anger, dissociation, all trying to do the best to keep us in the least amount of pain, even if we're living in pain.
Yeah, I mean, when we're younger, we have to live in that egocentric frame of mind, make sense of the world through what does it mean to us. Any other way would be terrifying. We wouldn't cope. We wouldn't exist. We don't have the tools for it. But unfortunately, it's in those early years that we formulate our belief systems. And if we can be blind to certain things, but we can also be blind to what we're blind to. So we don't know that there's something we need to change, and it becomes this horrible thing where the only seeming option we have is to blame ourselves and say, okay, well, it must be my fault. It's not egocentric at that point, because you're not making sense out of the world for yourself. You're just blaming yourself and saying it's all my fault.
Absolutely. And, and I always thought I had a great childhood. Don't get me wrong. My dad went to work. I was fed. We never had any money. But my mum was highly codependent. So her sense of worth came from being a mother, which was from her childhood. She needed to prove how good enough she was. And the only way she felt she could do that was being the best mum as possible. And as the youngest of 3 daughters, I felt that incredible sense of responsibility for my mum's happiness. Then conversely with my father, again, you know, whatever I did never felt quite good enough for that. And that really created a core wound in me of not feeling good enough. And I always say, which sounds ridiculous really, but it was probably only till I was about 23, 24 that I realized, oh my gosh, my parents are actually human beings with flaws, you know, and I know that sounds like crazy, but I thought because they were my parents, they know everything and they're perfect and what they say is real and true and genuine. I didn't realize that they were actually flawed human beings in their own right. And I don't know, it sounds crazy to say that, but I genuinely felt very childlike almost with my parents because I saw them as the elders and they were these perfect people and trying to make sense of all of that. And I always say to some of my clients sometimes that, I'll always say, when was the last time you upgraded your operating system in your phone? You know, and they'll say last month, last year, you know, most of the time it's within 12 months. And then it's like, when was the last time you upgraded your operating system that your parents gave you whilst you were growing up? And they're like, oh yeah, no. And I'm like, do you want to live your life like your parents? That doesn't mean you don't love them. And, you know, I'm not here to shame parents. You know, there's some great parents still doing the best that they can. I was the same, you know, but we know more now. We know different things. And it's, you know, I think as we become adults, it's taking ownership of our own happiness. And that's where I felt I was. I didn't know how. I didn't know what to do. But I knew that there had to be something else out there. And that for me, that missing piece for me was the nervous system stuff, the body work.
One of the questions I was curious about there, and I mean, I don't know if you answered this question or not, but do you have a relationship with your father still?
Yeah, I do. He's in a care home very close to, I've got two older sisters and one lives in America and the other one lives about 2 hours away from where I am. So I am the closest in proximity to my father and he's in a care home. And, you know, if you'd have said to me sort of 10 years ago even about going to see him and everything else, I probably would not have wanted to see him because every time I saw him, just like you mentioned, I'd revert back to this little girl desperately wanting praise, knowing it would never come, and then feeling totally dysregulated and that in some way that it was my fault. Obviously, I've worked on myself a lot over the years. So I do go to see him, but I don't go to see him for him. I go to see him for me, you know, in alignment with my values as a daughter, and we have a very boundaried relationship. He would not know that necessarily. He wouldn't say, you know, oh, I have a boundaried relationship with Caroline. He wouldn't even understand that. You know, when I go to see him, I know how to behave insofar as there's no point me telling him anything about what's going on in my life because it's irrelevant to him. You know, all he wants really is someone to hear him, what he says, for him to have a moan and a groan and everything else as such. Maybe me just to say, yeah, I hear you. I understand. What could you do about that? Or, you know, just some key questions potentially, but I'm not there to fix him. I'm not there to rescue him, and I don't expect anything from him. I think one of the biggest killers in relationships is expectation, that if we show up or we say this or, you know, we act in a certain way, our expectation becomes, because of our core wounds, surely they'll see that, surely they will change, surely they will say they love me or apologize or say something. And I learned through all of the work is don't expect anything from anybody. You know, just be yourself and hold yourself accountable for all of that. Because I think so much of us are looking for external people to make us feel better. And all healing is self-healing. So my father hasn't changed, just like my ex-husband hasn't changed either. What has changed is how I see their behavior projected onto me. I'm not receiving it as a reflection of me anymore. I actually feel really sorry for him and my ex actually, because they're deeply unhappy and wounded individuals at the core who will never change. And I just think that lack of depth and connection and love that they will never experience in their lives is really, really actually super sad. So I go for me to tick the boxes of being a really, really good daughter because that's in alignment with my values. And I go maybe once or twice a week and we have a WhatsApp group with my sisters. So I do the things that feel right for me. And of course, if he goes into hospital, which he does on occasion, I'm there and I'll do the things, again, in alignment with my values. But, you know, if he does say something, and it still happens now, I will get up and say, I'm leaving now. And I will go and I'll wait for him to either message me or something, because he has learned if he doesn't, I'd quite happily not speak to him, and I feel okay about that because it's not about that. So just like you not speaking to your father, I'd be okay with that too, and I would hold that boundary for myself, because if I don't do that, I'm abandoning myself. So I have to hold myself, my inner child, my core emotional wounds, and me as the adult today needs to look after myself like that too.
I always look at it from the perspective of he could call me, so, and he doesn't, so that's his choice, and it's all the ball's in his court, you know. But they're, in my opinion, both those chaps are missing out on an incredible human being.
Correct. I mean, how sad is that?
It
really is desperately sad. I mean, even when my ex-husband's parents were alive too, and obviously I know I'm biased, but I have amazing kids, okay? You know, they're 16 and 19, and I have the best relationship with them. They are incredible. And my ex-husband's parents, they only saw my son once when he was 6 weeks old, I think that was it. And they never met my daughter. They're sadly both passed away now. They just weren't bothered. But it was really important for me to make sure that my children knew that them not seeing them was zero reflection of them. And actually, you know, I do some workshops in schools around this too, and for teachers. You know, it's really important for our children to recognize other people's behavior is not a reflection of them. So my two children know stuff now I didn't know till I was in my 40s, you know. So they are so good at recognizing other people's behavior. You know, for me, if someone even raised their eyebrow a little bit, I'd be like, I'd be on edge. What can I do? I need to fix it. They don't like me. What can I do? I'm going to be so nice to them as such. And my children, you know, they're kind and compassionate, but they have a really strong sense of self. And I didn't have that till I was in my 40s.
That is one of the best gifts you can give a young person, because the world is not as it's not Disneyland out there, is it?
Not, sadly not.
But I mean, we're going to move on to narcissism in just a moment. But I just wanted to reflect on what you were speaking about just then, and my interpretation of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that, you know, and I see it a lot in clients that come to me, and you know, they say they want to change and they say they want to move on from things and let go of things. And ultimately what they're describing is some form of acceptance. But what they tend to do is they try to find different angles to come at the problem to achieve the same desire. And it's the desire that's the problem. It's that need for that person's attention, that person's praise. And they go, oh, okay, well, I don't need that anymore. But what I'm going to do, because it feels different to what I've always done, it must be a different path. But it's not. It's the same path, really. Or at least it ends in the same destination. And that's the bit that potentially would benefit them to practice letting go of that need for that acceptance. And I learned something through writing my book, and it was I was writing some stuff about my childhood, and then I looked. It was hard to write. I came back to it a couple of days later, and when I read it, it didn't make sense. And I realized that what I'd done is I'd created this little pretty narrative that I could grab onto because of the one I wasn't willing to accept. And what that meant was, because I had done that, what I had done over the years is I'd continued the work of my father, kept that little boy prisoned within my mind, and kept basically gaslighting him and feeding him shame and all sorts of things. And it was very, very helpful. It was very, very helpful, albeit horrible.
Yeah, it's like an invisible cage, isn't it? We feel like we're trapped in this cage, but actually, where are the sides of it? You know, we can do that, but it has to be ourselves. No one else is doing it as such, that it's within us. But again, it's just about you protecting yourself in those given moments, because I work with internal family systems. Kind of changed my life. And I know it sounds a bit extreme.
Not at all.
It's an evidence-based parts therapeutic model. And it's literally, you know, it made so much sense to me, where the premise is we all have a self, a source, an essence, true self, core self, whatever you want to call that. And that's innate within us. It's there all of the time. And what happens in our childhood is we will experience events or people or behaviors, and we will interpret that, like you say, in a very egocentric way as a kid, that in some way it's my fault, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And that becomes like a core emotional wound. And we call that an exile in IFS. And what we want is not to feel like that. You know, as human beings, we don't want to feel that core pain. It's the biggest pain we could possibly feel. So we end up having what are called these protector parts come up for us. So we can have like manager parts, which are day-to-day ones like perfectionism and people pleasing and all of those that, you know, we can all relate to. And And then in moments where it's like the scab's been ripped off that core wound and something has happened, we get these like firefighter parts. So that could be things like addiction, emotional eating, dissociation, pain even, that are in that moment really trying to distract you away from feeling what the core emotional pain is. And it made sense to me because I had so many parts of me that I felt real shame about. I drank at various stages to numb myself out, emotionally ate, self-harm. What was that about? I felt so much shame. Why am I doing that? What is wrong with me? I'm an adult. Stop doing it. I know it shouldn't be done. But I realize now with a kindness to my younger self that the pain that I was creating from self-harming still felt less pain than sitting in that emotional pain for me. So it's a really great opportunity for us to think there are no bad parts of you. However destructive they may feel to you or indeed other people, they are there with a loving intention for yourself. And that really changed not only how I saw myself, but how I saw other people. And that's kind of how I look at narcissism too. A narcissist is a deeply wounded individual with this core exile wound, and their protector parts are things like gaslighting, coercive control, manipulation, violence on occasion too. All of these become that individual's protector parts that we can then cumulative and collectively label as a narcissist.
And they practice that enough times that they become good at it, and it becomes a habit for them, and they almost can't help it.
It's their false sense of self. Their inner systems are that deeply traumatized. You can never get beyond their protector parts to make them feel safe enough just to be themselves. We all can have destructive protector parts too. All of us can have that too. But the difference between, say, someone like us and a narcissist is we can recognize that and see beyond that and take some ownership and responsibility and work with those parts to feel safe enough to be ourselves. A narcissist inner system is so tightly locked down, and we know from fMRI scans as well on the brain changes, there are less mirror neurons too, so there's less empathy. So there's lots of nuances that start to happen, which is why we know narcissists will not change. It's not because I wouldn't want to and help them, but actually, like we said, there has to be some sense of ownership and understanding. If I went to my ex-husband or even my dad and said, let's work on those inner child wounds. Let's work on that. These are parts of you. They would both be like, you're crazy. I only act like this because you're like that. If you weren't like that, I wouldn't have to do any of that. It's your fault as such. So you're kind of banging your head against a brick wall, really. And that's why the word narcissist is key, to know that so you can then focus on yourself.
I've met people and I've had clients that have been in a genuinely savage narcissistic relationship. It is no joke what narcissists do to people, putting aside gender, whatever, is unbelievable. They are, I don't want to say broken, but if I say broken, it's you kind of get what I mean. It's like they have been emotionally tortured for such a long time that they have absolutely no idea of themselves, and they don't know what to do next. And it's savage. It really is really quite heartbreaking. Let's get a clear definition of narcissism. So what are the components of narcissism that define a person as a narcissist?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the ways that clinical psychologists will look at narcissism, there's a book called the DSM, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And it's this great big book that has a load of disorders in there as well, of which narcissistic personality disorder is in there too. And in there, it's one of 10 personality disorders, a cluster B. And in there, there are 9 traits listed. And to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, you need to exhibit 5 of the 9. Now, there are multiple flaws in this, and I'm sure anyone listening who's dealing with a narcissist will be, immediately understanding of this. 1, to get a diagnosis anyway means someone needs to go, oh, I think I might be a narcissist, or I think I'm not acting I need to go and see someone and get a diagnosis. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So there's your first flaw. The second thing is, let's just say in this magical land, someone goes, you know what, there might be something wrong. And very often they can do this. They can fake empathy, because if they think a partner is going to leave, they may well want to go to therapy, not because they're going to change, but because they're going to triangulate the therapist or the psychologist or whomever to make it out it's your fault, not mine. So it means then, even if they go, and this is what makes it such a complex issue, because there's not a one size fits all, there's nuances each and every step. So let's say they do go. They are masters of disguise as well. So they will act in a certain way, and all of a sudden they'll come out and go, they think you're the narcissist, or you've got borderline personality disorder, or something like this, where you will then have this label as such. So, and even then, 9 traits. When I teach this, so I teach like a narcissistic abuse specialist program. There's over 35 traits I go through with different things, but they're all really protector parts of somebody, but they're really pervasive in different areas of somebody's life. So for me, the whole medicalization of narcissistic personality disorder has really, again, done a disservice for those, because actually, I mean, this is kind of most of the DSM, if from my perspective and opinion, and I'm not a medical professional, as in I'm not a doctor or anything, but if you look at things like narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, you look at generalized anxiety disorder even, for instance. If I look at those and you take out the word disorder and put in response, it changes everything. You know, narcissistic personality response. Okay, it's a response to my childhood wounds and this is how I'm showing up. It's a real understanding that trauma really lies underneath all of those elements too. So how I look at narcissism is how I said, it's a deeply wounded individual where they will have these destructive protector parts due to their core wounds that we can collectively, just like we call a car or a cake, these protector parts, they become very abusive, very they're very kind of destructive protector parts as such. They're reactive, whereas ours become responsive to the reaction of those. And we can then collectively call somebody a narcissist from that scenario, because there's no ownership, there's no empathy, they don't want to change, they're always going to project it out on yourselves. They can fake it as such too. There's something called cognitive empathy, where they think, okay, if I act like this, I will receive something back, which is what we call narcissistic supply. So really for me, you know, narcissism is really about an individual who is deeply wounded, takes no ownership or responsibility for the hurt that they may perpetrate against somebody else, see it as everybody else's fault, not their own. And they can act very victim-like too. So a lot of people think there's these kind of grandiose, over malignant narcissists, which, you know, we kind of would know that they're a narcissist. You know, they might be in politics, they could be leaders, they could be people that we would know, bosses, leaders, whomever. For me, one of the most dangerous types of narcissist is really the covert narcissist. You know, the covert narcissist is really a narcissist that is very stealth-like. You wouldn't necessarily know, because when they come out of a relationship, they are going to act like it's your fault. So other people then are left thinking, I don't know who to believe here, because they can be really convincing. And I think they're probably the most dangerous kind, because they act like poor me and everything, which we might feel as well. So it leaves people with this kind of like, who is it to? So it's not a black and white subject. There's grey areas, it's complex, and it's every individual is going to be different. And it's about that validation piece, that it's not your fault, you've done nothing wrong. What you can do then is not change this is why I talk about narcissistic abuse and narcissistic trauma. So narcissistic abuse is by the narcissist, the perpetrator. You cannot change that. What you hold on to is narcissistic trauma. How you feel in your body as a result of your interpretation of the abuse that is happening to you. You can't change the narcissistic abuse, you can change the trauma. So you change your perception inside of you to realize, that's not a reflection of me. So like I say, my dad, my ex, they haven't changed. What has changed is how I feel about me. So I see other people's behavior as zero reflection of myself then. That's the piece that only you can work on, not in changing the narcissist.
That's really important, because I've had clients say to me that and what it sounded like to me was like reactive abuse, whereas they've gone to couples therapy and one of them has used certain terms to fire the other one up, and then uses that reaction as a way of saying, look, they're crazy, look what I'm dealing with. And I'm like, wow, it's just, it's something else.
And sometimes when I work with clients, they'll come to me and say, both my parents are narcissists. And I'm like, okay, let's work through that. Because you wouldn't have long-term two narcissists staying in a relationship. You'd have a narcissist and a codependent. So someone who also has a lack of self-worth. But what happens is sometimes those in relationships with narcissists end up exhibiting also narcissistic behavior, because you tend to find those in narcissistic relationships. So the narcissist doesn't have many mirror neurons. People in relationships with narcissists have more mirror neurons than most other people. So we start to mirror the behavior of the narcissist in the hope that surely if we act like them, it will be safer for us. So you end up exhibiting narcissistic traits yourself to stay safe, but it's not the same intention as a narcissist as such, because they won't change. So it can look, and I look back sometimes at even in our relationship, I think, my God, what was wrong with me as such? I was like crazy sometimes. And if people would have saw that, they'd have thought, Caroline, you are crazy. But again, it was that reactive abuse, the gaslighting, me trying to stay safe in those situations too. So, and I think that's where a lot of shame starts to come in, because we end up acting in ways that aren't ways we would normally do. We're just trying to stay safe.
Yeah, you start saying stuff to yourself like, I feel like I'm going crazy, I don't know what's going on, I feel totally out of control. And then you start looking elsewhere for reasons. Oh, maybe I've got this, maybe I've got that, maybe this is wrong with me, and it's not you.
Yeah, what's wrong with me? I'm not pretty enough, I don't look good enough, I need to do more, be more. It's my fault as such. If my partner's cheating on me, it's me. There must be something wrong with me. What can I do as such? And I think that's the key thing. Those of us who are in relationships with narcissists over time, that's what we think. We don't see their behavior. And because we become so conditioned to breadcrumbs of love, often because of our childhood, breadcrumbs of love are still better than none. So we end up staying in these relationships, and we actually become addicted to being in these toxic relationships. It's called trauma bonding. So we're used to kind of the dopamine rush when they're love bombing and saying all the lovely things, and it's like, oh, great, filling the hole in your soul. And then when the kind of silent treatment, you might push back on something and they might give you silent treatment or get angry at you. You start to produce more cortisol in the body because your body is going into a fight, flight or freeze response. That cycle of hormone secretion, we become physiologically addicted to it. That's why even coming out of the relationship, it's really difficult, because every cell in our body wants to go back in the relationship to have that hormone secretion. So it really takes time and real strategy and support to really start to heal and move forward and heal after narcissistic abuse.
Like you say, it's that strategy and support, because quite a lot of the time there's this feeling of loss, this grieving process, but you're grieving someone that never existed. And it's like they can't get their head around that at the time, because it's all too raw and difficult. And that's why that support, you need someone to talk you off the ledge. Don't text them, don't go back, don't do the thing you always do.
Things we have to recognize with that is, and again from a sort of somatic perspective, the impulse to text needs to be completed. We need to do that, but we don't do it to the narcissist. So I'll often, if I work with my clients or in my communities, I'll say, write the text you want to send. You need to honor the impulse of what you feel you want to send. Let other people validate that for you, because if you're expecting the validation from them, it's not going to happen. So honor the impulse. We can validate that back, and then that can help soothe the nervous system to just keep moving forward as such too. So we have to honor the feelings too.
It's like, I'm sorry, I chuckled there because it reminds me of a client I was working with, and she was having this trouble, and she said to me, can I just text you instead? And I said, absolutely, just text me instead. I said, I might not respond. And there was one night I was sat on the sofa and I had my phone with me, and I just got a text that said, you're a dick. And I was just like, oh. And
Caroline, your wife didn't see that. That conversation.
I really honestly, it made me laugh so much, because it was part of me that wanted to double check it wasn't me. But I was like, I haven't done anything. It's okay, Johnny. Just chill. It's all right.
I hear you.
But it made me chuckle.
It is. Sometimes you really need to say these things. And if we have this impulse in our body, we have to somatically complete those response cycles as such. Often in my sessions, I have clients swearing and saying stuff, and they're putting their hands over the mouth. They don't want to say, but we have to have completion of survival responses for us to be able to move forward, so we know we're good enough as the adults we are today. We have to have this completion. We have to have this validation and give our younger selves that which didn't feel safe to say, didn't feel safe to do. And we have to have that so we can get our nervous system back into a state of safety, to know it's safe to be ourselves for no other reason and nobody else. It's just safe to simply be you for breathing. And that is good enough.
Yeah, you're right. I talk a lot about it with clients around anger, about having that anger, like the gaslighting of themselves, that I'm not angry, I shouldn't be angry, but you are angry, and it's okay to be angry. Being angry is not wrong. It's a message. Emotions are messages. They're there to tell us something, and the way we're interpreting potentially is the problem. And, I encourage people to have that anger, whether it's that, like you say, that deep breath work and some screaming and some shouting, or whether it's get on the punch bag, or whether it's write a letter with all of the swear words you like in it, whatever it is, get it out.
We're really not taught in our society about healthy anger and healthy aggression, and I was like this. I lived decades of my life in a freeze response, so when I teach this stuff, I teach it like it's traffic lights. I call it the traffic lights of tolerance. So red is when you're in freeze. Yellow is the fight flight, where we mobilize more energy, where we would be angry or anxious. And green is when we're safe, connected, and grounded. But to move from freeze, which is where a lot of people end up being in these narcissistic relationships, we have to express the anger that we have been suppressing. We have to do that. The problem being is we live in this society that when we start to feel that mobilized energy and maybe that anger part coming up, we stuff it back down again, because we think, what will people think of us? They're going to judge me and think I'm a failure and I can't cope and stuff. So we end up in this cycle of freeze and explosive moments of anger and then shame and back down again. And then we wonder why we start to get chronic illnesses like IBS or autoimmune disorders. So we have to express it, and you can do it in a healthy way. And again, when I always look at anger as parts of us, like through the internal family systems lens, I had a really strong anger part that I suppressed, okay? I see anger as a bodyguard to our wounded younger parts of us. So when anger comes up, it's there, and that anger part is almost going, hey, I know you're hurting, little one. I'm going to shout. I'm going to behave in this way, because then maybe they will change their behavior and you go back to feeling safe again. But again, it's about the system knowing that in the moment, yeah, that might feel good for a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, but there are different ways of handling that. But we still need to express that, and that can come with crying, it can come with shaking, it can come with lots and lots of different somatic techniques that we can use to really start to express all of this so it's not suppressed. And anger needs to be heard, because if we don't hear that part of us, yeah, these are the chronic illnesses of the future.
It's like having a committee meeting with yourself, and if you imagine it as a business meeting and just telling one person at the table to shut up all the time, it wouldn't go well, would it?
Come back louder. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It wants to be heard, because it's trying to honor, the pain that you might be feeling. So there are ways to express anger without shouting or punching anybody. But even if you want to shout or you want that, that's why, if you work with people and they have been suppressing, they will often feel like something in their throat, or there's a tightness around the jaw and the shoulders are really, really braced, because they're literally in that fight, flight response. Their nervous system and body has learnt to stay braced, to protect. They're hypervigilant all of the time. But to move if they're in freeze, which is where most people end up with when they're in long-term narcissistic relationships, totally disconnected from their bodies, unfeeling, just existing, to really move to that green light again so they can really start living as themselves and feeling safe to do so, we have to process that sympathetic energy. We need to discharge and express that. Otherwise, you're never going to have that sense of grounded. So it's a really important part. And it makes it really challenging, because that red light can look really similar to the green. And when I work with a lot of my clients who are going through the court process, for instance, they will be going into court and it looks like everything might be okay because they're not crying, they're not, overly emotional. But actually, if you're not trauma informed, you might think then, well, it can't be that bad then. If you don't know what to look for and think, actually, they're stuck in a really deep shutdown in their nervous system in freeze, what you can start to think about, and this is the same with kids, I often work with a lot of clients who obviously have children with narcissists. And when the child goes to spend time with the narcissist, they are super well behaved. They are so well behaved and everything looks fine. And then they come back to you and all of a sudden they're all over the place. And that can look like they are better behaved with a narcissistic parent, so there must be something wrong with you. And actually, if you know how the nervous system works, they're in a deep freeze and appease response when they're with the narcissist, trying to stay safe in the red light. And when they come back to you and they start to feel safer, they move into the yellow, the sympathetic. So they mobilize more energy so it can look more energetic. And the number of times you might say, I know I used to say this to my ex about things would come when they came back and they would share stuff. The standard response was, well, they were fine with me. Well, of course they were, because they're in freeze and they're trying to please you as such. So again, if we don't understand this stuff and the nervous system piece in this, parents who do have exes who are narcissists can feel a huge amount of shame, because actually they're dealing very often with a highly dysregulated child in the sympathetic, where the narcissist is dealing with a highly dysregulated child in freeze, but that's easier to navigate.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that, because I have honestly this is going out to some clients today, I think, because there's some people that that need to hear that. They really do, because
I didn't know that. I thought there was something wrong with me when my kids came back and they were more anxious, they were angry, and I thought, well, and even I thought, they're really well behaved with him. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. It's because they feel safer with me to express. They feel safer with me, and they start to regulate more. But that means they do shift from freeze into fight flight.
Yeah, honestly, that information there is so valuable, and you could apply it to even school, people being at school, kids being at school and being subjected to narcissism through, say, a teacher or a PE teacher or something like that, and then they come home and they misbehave and they're like, I don't know what's going on, it's just crazy. That is...
You're absolutely right. You go to a parents' evening sometimes and that, oh, they're really well behaved, they're really like this, and and then you think, well, they're not like that at home.
Yeah.
What's going on? And that's the thing. This should be the curiosity in how our children are behaving, and this is all the stuff that I teach, where it really helps people understand how we operate as human beings. Because when we do understand that, we see things so differently. These are just normal biological responses, but it's how we perceive in our society things like anger. And the same with anxiety. Anxiety is a survival response. It's a survival response in our fight, flight, sympathetic part of our nervous system to our perception of danger. And that perception has come from our past experiences. But it doesn't have to be a life sentence. We just need to understand with the curiosity of, why do I feel my world is dangerous as such? Because it's things that are stuck. So, trauma does not have to be a life sentence. Narcissistic abuse doesn't have to be a life sentence. These are all shining spotlights on maybe how we really deeply feel about ourselves, but there's so much we can do about that too, to kind of, keep moving forward. And that doesn't mean when you do this work, you're going to wake up one morning going, oh, I'm healed. That doesn't happen, because life happens. It's an ongoing journey, and you always get to a new level, and there's always a new devil that crops up as well. So you're just always working with the curiosity of, why do I feel like this about that? And you just keep going deeper with that all of the time.
I just don't think you can underestimate those belief systems that are created in them early years. They feel like facts, unchangeable facts. You will not believe at them early stages that thing can change. And that is a problem. And because I might be talking about something to you that sounds just unachievable or unbelievable, or like I'm living in Disneyland. But that's because potentially somebody's had a narcissistic parent and then swaps that for a narcissistic partner, because that's what they're looking for. That's how they know how to be. And you try
the inversion of love.
Exactly. And they're it's a cruelty that I'm so pleased that people like you are putting information out there, because that is the start of it, I think, is learning about it.
We didn't know we could change that up until sort of 25 odd years ago. This is why CBT came about, cognitive behavioral therapy, which absolutely has a place in our society about, cognitively, so front part of the brain, navigating our behaviors to better our lives. And, it was really helpful. The problem with that is it's very much symptom management. I'm managing cognitively the behaviors that are showing up for me. And we now know from a neuroscience perspective that actually we can change all of that. The brain is, the plasticity in the brain, we can start to change that. We can work with the nervous system. So, that's why we have to work somatically with the nervous system, and also the mind, the brain, all of these elements come in together. We have to validate and learn how to manage symptoms. We're living, challenging lives. But equally, what's the root cause of why we react the way we do sometimes? And, we live in a society where all we see is behavior. And actually, if we're stepping into more compassion, it's like, what happened to them for that behavior to show up? And it's just little shifts like that of kindness and compassion. That doesn't mean we don't have boundaries, and it doesn't mean we don't exert them if needed, and it's not an excuse for abuse. But if we can explain and help people understand, no one else's behavior is ever a reflection of you, ever. You might feel like that because it's, you might be in these cycles all the time, but actually it's just your perception and the way you receive that and their projection of their behavior. That's the bit you can change.
Yeah, it's that changing. That's the part, isn't it? It's that behavior that we're trying to change. And I think sometimes in them early stages, especially, people think that they're going to get rid of the emotion. It's like, no, you may still feel like that, and you can maybe deal with that in the moment it's happening. Very unlikely, because if you've been emotionally triggered, you're probably not fully in control. But it's about realizing that if you can change that behavior, then later on it's going to be a little bit easier because you haven't got regret and shame and all them things piled on top of you. But you may still feel like you did,
right.
There'll be aspects of you that feel a certain way, and that can sometimes be perceived as, oh, I'm not doing it right, or I'm doing it wrong, or it's not working, or I'm never going to heal. So I think that's important too.
That's the key thing in being able to look back. I look back at my behavior because you understand that you're here now in the present and you're looking back and that behavior was there for a reason, as opposed to I feel it right now and I'm acting like this right now. And this is, again, we have to have these completions of survival responses and sort of time stamping things in our brain into the past. Otherwise, we're always reacting in the present as if it's happening to us right now, even though it could have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago as such. It's still locked and trapped in our body. So we have these adult bodies, but with these kind of inner children ruling how we behave to not want to feel some kind of core pain. So it's just working together with our inner system slowly and gently, so that we can start to know and feel that we are worthy and good enough too. And that just changes everything. But it doesn't mean, if someone's mean to me, it doesn't mean I don't feel it in my body.
Yeah.
I still feel it. It's not very nice and I don't like it. But I don't see it as a reflection of me, and I need to go into a trauma response to protect my inner child. I know it isn't me, and I can stay very present in that uncomfortable feeling too.
And it takes practice. And sometimes there are days, tired, hungry, whatever, where the trauma response just comes back. You're like, oh, well.
For me, Sunday morning, I had a really big cry, because I had to go to the dentist. And I've been a couple of times. I hate going to the dentist, and I'd rather stick pins in my eyes than go to the dentist, to be fair. Like, literally, it's my biggest, it's irrational, and I know it is. I still go, but I don't like it. Then my daughter's doing her GCSEs and doing brilliantly. She's doing really, really well. We've got some illness in the family right now. And also I'm hoping to buy a house, which is £1.25 million in my own name.
Wow.
So there was a lot of feeling of like, whoa, am I doing the right thing? Is it this? There's a lot of stuff. And my capacity felt really full. And I could feel it. I'd felt it on Saturday. And I thought, I need to lean into this now and feel it. And I sat there and I just cried. I expressed. And when we do that, it's called adaptive information processing. As I felt into it and just allowed myself to do what my body was designed to do, to have completion, to have a sense of, understanding, to shift myself from being sort of, in this kind of heightened state. I thought, well, worst thing could happen is this, and I can do this, and I can do that, and everything else. And then I could give a big sigh at the end, and my nervous system came back to a sense of green, into that sense of grounded. So it happens to all, and I do a lot of work on myself, and I have a big capacity to be able to cope with things. But I knew my sensations were coming up, and I thought, I need to give some space to this right now. If that had been 10 years ago, I'd have kept going and kept going and kept going. And then I'd have got ill, or something would have happened, whatever that may have been. So I learned very quickly to be guided by my body sensations, and to give space to feel, to keep on then building my capacity too.
Yeah, that crying. I mean, when I was a kid, I had a really uncomfortable relationship with crying because I'd get hurt and then I would get beaten until I stopped crying. But that meant as an adult, I wasn't able to cry. And in the last few years, I've been allowing that to happen. And It's almost addictive. It's almost addictive. Like, I don't mind a good cry these days.
Oh, and you know, the tears
Yeah.
actually, when we're crying for emotion, have a certain hormone in them. They're there specifically. We're designed to cry.
Yeah, it's the
I know
best.
we have watery eyes if we have things in it, but we are designed to cry. And you think of wild animals, you know, a wild animal doesn't have an experience and then they're lying under the tree going, I'm not shaking now, I'm not doing it. People are, those animals over there are going to judge me. They'll do it. They'll just do what they need to do to express and discharge that energy and go back to being present again. Because we have this front part of our brain as human beings, we overthink and we think, what will people say about us and judge us? So we suppress it and stuff it back down again. But our bodies are amazing and they are designed to heal. They're designed to work for us. We just suppress all of that for fear of what someone else might say to us.
Yeah, they know exactly what to do. And this is what I'm saying to people a lot of the time is to get back in tune with those mechanisms that are already there. They're already there. Like, we have those emotions, and like, you don't necessarily choose to cry. It's what feels right, whether it's something happy, whether it's something sad, whatever it is, it's there to release that emotion or to process it or to at least help. And I find it helpful. I'm like, why didn't someone tell me about crying ages ago?
Very good, because it really does release the emotions. Often when I'm working with my clients too, they end up shaking quite a lot as well. And again, shaking is something that we would maybe feel scared about. We would think, oh my God, what will people think of me if I'm sat here shaking? But shaking is a brilliant way for our body to start to discharge that suppressed sympathetic energy that we have in our body. And again, it's if we allow that to happen, we have an emotional release and we come back to a sense of presence. But again, a lot of us don't do that because we keep on suppressing and suppressing and suppressing. And then we wonder why the disease and illness starts to follow.
It's such a valid point. And another one I'm grateful for you bringing up. But I'm also very conscious of the time. I've had you on here now for quite a while, but there was two things I wanted to ask before you go. Yeah. One of them was on identifying the differences between neurodivergence and narcissism, and the other one was just a reflection really on what you spoke about with covert narcissism. And I got this sense that you were saying with the covert narcissism, it's kind of weaponizing it in a sense. And I can't imagine that they would call themselves a narcissist, but does that mean that they are aware of their traits and know how to use them?
So you always have to look at intention as such. And a lot of people will say things to me, are they aware of their behavior? And sometimes they are aware, but they're aware of the need to drive to do that for themselves. So it's not like they're aware that they're hurting you because it's all about them. What they are aware of is, I need to do this for me. So, and I think that there's a real distinction with that. They love to the capacity they can love to get what they need back. So there's always, again, there's layers to all of that too. And covert narcissists are so stealth-like in the victim mentality nature. And they could be ones that you would know online, that you would know in person, that maybe that, they're always saying that other things are happening to them. But equally, it could also be the person experiencing it too, which is what makes it really, really difficult. But over time, it does become apparent because it's always everybody else's fault, always. And, but they're always looking for that sense of sympathy. Oh, you're such a good person, like with you're such a good dad, you're such a good this, you're such a good that, as such, because it's feeding their narcissistic supply. And it can be really, really hard to spot. And whenever people talk to me about this, I absolutely believe them insofar as you can immediately start to tell whether they are the covert narcissist or not. And one of the key things is a lot of people think they are the narcissist. Maybe it's me. No narcissist would ever ask if they are a narcissist. So the covert is stealth-like, but you start to see areas and nuances of shifts in behavior and the words that they are saying, because they're constantly looking for this supply, approval, all of those. And whilst we do as well, those who are in that relationships, it's not as much as a covert narcissist. And then the neurodivergent element, and we often get where people are talking about, autism and narcissism, they are completely different. And, I think we need to be really, really clear on that too, because, particularly, I have a big free group on Facebook, and, parents who, and we don't approve posts when it's about this at all, because you get people saying, my ex is autistic and a narcissist. It's very rare you would get both. Very, very rare. Okay. They may use the fact that, it's autism as such, but it would normally be narcissism for all of that too. People with autism have empathy. They have empathy. They may not exhibit it so you can really see it all of the time, but they have capabilities for that. Narcissists do not have that at all. And the other thing that we have to be mindful of from a neurodivergency perspective is things like ADHD. So we often see, we see now a massive rise in the diagnosis of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity, another disorder, right? So let's say we take out the word disorder and put in response. So what we have to look at, that is a missing piece, I think, when we're looking at diagnosing people with ADHD in the classroom and indeed as adults, is a trauma history. If you look at the traits of things like complex PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it's really a response. They are so similar, so similar. So if you're working with someone, for instance, and we need to look at the trauma history, because they may well have ADHD. It may just be trauma. It could be both. And if we're thinking about it from a children's neurodivergency perspective, that disruptive child in the classroom, could be in a fight-flight response because there's a load of trauma history. And equally, when we experience trauma, our middle ear actually becomes affected. So our middle ear should be nice and tight. So the sound waves that go in, we tune out to the background noise and turn the volume up on human voice. We're trying to connect. So it goes in and we kind of react normally and it's safe and we can tune into human voice. When we've experienced trauma, that toned middle ear that should be nice and tight becomes really loose. So as the sound waves come in, it switches. It turns the volume up on the background noise, so it's really, really loud, and it tunes out to adult voices. And it goes down to our gut, and this is called neuroception. We perceive it as dangerous, and it goes back up to our brain, and then we act in a certain way. So feelings can come before thoughts. So if we know that and think of that child in the classroom who's acting really disruptive, what if they're in a fight-flight response because of a trauma history? What if their middle ear is affected and actually all they're hearing is all that sound in the classroom, that the volume is up? That's going to make anybody feel dysregulated too. Do we want to be labeling that child as with ADHD? Or do we want to get a comprehensive history? It may be ADHD and trauma, but it could just be trauma as well. So I think, the trauma history that we all go through, we need to be looking at those elements as well. Because I do think, and even from a narcissism perspective too, we need to understand human behavior. We need to understand trauma. We need to understand why people show up in the way that they do. There's no bad parts for anybody. They're just there for a reason. Even if I work with an ADHD client, we look at it as a part. It's not a bad part. How do we work with that to make your life better and to create more growth for you, knowing that this isn't a bad part? We just work with it. We welcome it in and we work with it. So we're just looking at those elements all the time too. But it's these things, we're never taught any of these at all. But it's about the compassion and curiosity about why we show up the way that we do.
That word curiosity is one of my favorite words. I mean, it's interesting when you were talking about that then, it's interesting to me how many, and I'm thinking it is actually predominantly female clients that will say that they're going to get an ADHD diagnosis. And if I ask them about anything to do with their family, they are extremely active in telling me how wonderful their childhood was and how all of these different things were fine and everything's okay. And I don't know, I just find that intriguing. I'm curious about that. I'm curious as...
And maybe it is, and maybe it is ADHD as such, because there are brain changes with ADHD clients and stuff too. But I think, and I follow a lot of the work with Dr. Gabor Mate, and he talks a lot about, are we born with ADHD? Or again, is it a response to things we've experienced? And, we don't really know definitive evidence on any of that. I'm sure maybe it will come at a certain point. But again, it's just about curiosity. There's no badness in us as such. As long as we're open to working with, then we can do whatever. The problem being with narcissists are they're not, so it doesn't matter whether it's ADHD or not. And some people like the diagnosis too, because it means it's a reason why. And so we have to be very sensitive to that too, because that means like I've got ADHD, which means it explains everything.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. There's the sensitivity to that. But I always say, how about we just work with that and let's see how we can move forward. What is it you're not doing you want to do? How do we move forward from that? And then we kind of end up looking at the past a little bit, and we're just working with the whole of the inner system like that too, regardless of what parts are there.
I noticed that they defend it, and it's almost like there probably is some trauma in the background there, but they're not willing or able at that point to look into it. And I always think that, if I'm honest, I think these things, mobile phones, I think they're the narcissists. I think they cause a lot of neurodivergence, if I'm honest.
I question myself sometimes as well, and I think, am I? And I've done tests on it, and I'm not, but I do. Every now and again, I think, as such. So, it's just a really complex subject,
Absolutely.
and I think the key to all of this is, there's innate goodness in all of us. That sense of self, just like on a cloudy day, the sunshine is still there. It's within us, but are we aware? Can we work with that? Narcissist, you can't. And I've had people say to me, oh, I've worked with narcissists, they can. Yeah, they weren't narcissists. And I remember talking to a lady, about 3 or 4 years ago, and she said, I work in the prison service and I've worked with narcissists and they have healed and they've moved forward. And I say, can I just ask, when you say that they've healed, what happens to them when they're healed and you can kind of work with them and then and she said, they get released early. And I went, and you've never got curious about that? I mean, it's like, okay.
Sorry, that's brilliant. What a great question.
Oh my goodness. It's like, because I know they will always do things for themselves, and they can be very, very master manipulators on this, and they can act like, if you met my ex-husband, maybe not my dad because he is a grumpy old so-and-so, but if you met my ex-husband, you'd think, what a charming man as such, but again, it's the behind closed doors nature of all of that.
Oh, I had so many more questions, but I'm so grateful for your time. I was going to talk about gender, but we'll do that another time, I'm sure. But just one last question, and that is there anything you'd like to pass along to anybody that you feel could help them with their self-development?
Do you know what? I think anything that comes from us doing this interview, and I always say this, it's hope. Hope that where you are right now does not mean where you have to be, whatever your age. Because I know, like me, I thought at 40 my life was over. If you're 50, 60, it doesn't mean, each and every day is a fresh opportunity to lean into growth and stuff too. So, just hold on to that sense of hope, but find the right community, find the right people to help and support you and validate you, so that you can, little teeny tiny steps eventually lead to giant leaps too. So, each and every day doesn't have to be a lot. It's just a teeny tiny step that feels safe. You want to stretch your nervous system, not keep stressing it, and so it's tiny amounts, not too much, because trauma is too much, too quick, too fast. So you need to just slow it down to eventually speed up.
You're incredible. Thank you so much for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Everything you've said has been of just the most utmost value. So thank you so much. Just before you go, where can people find you? And is there anything you want to direct them towards before you go?
Yes. So, on Instagram or on Facebook, I have a big free group and groups that people can get support. And obviously on Instagram too. I've actually got a book out for pre-order at the moment. It's out on the 16th of July with Hay House, and it's called How to Heal After Narcissistic Abuse. So it literally is all the education you need around narcissism. So a lot of the stuff we've spoken about but in more detail. And it's a workbook. It's practical tools to really help you start to heal and thrive after narcissistic abuse, because it is possible. You just need to know how. So that book is out right now. And if you pre-order it before the 16th of July, you'll also get access to my Healing Codependency Program and Regulate, which is a somatic healing and vagus nerve toning program, just to kind of add in a little bit of a bonus for people too.
Oh, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. It sounds like an incredible book. I shall jump on the pre-order myself, I think. Thank you so much for your time today, and just keep doing what you're doing. You're incredible, and you're someone that's out there shining a light, and I hope you're proud of yourself. I really am.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Johnny. Really appreciate it.